Well, summer is here, and so are the tourists. And you may be seeing a lot of cars on the road with out of state license plates. God forbid you're in an accident with somebody from out of state. Michigan's no fault auto insurance rules, that all these things that have changed over the past few years. How does that work when it's you in state and someone out of state? Well, Tom Sinas from Sinas Dramus Law Firm joins us to break it all down. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Todd. How are you doing?
I'm well. You know, my girls and I have a game we play on the road where we try to find all the different
Mhm.
states on the license plates, and we sure are seeing a lot of them this time of year. Pretty common, right?
Very, very common. We're lucky to have them, as you said, but we have some new rules that I think many people may not be aware of by way of the changes to our auto insurance law.
Well, let's start with the old stuff. Let's do a refresher on how the insurance law treated claims of out-of-staters.
Yeah, that's a great place to start because it gives you a way to compare and contrast. Generally speaking, before the auto insurance law was changed in 2019, as a general proposition, out-of-staters had most of the same rights that Michiganders had. And by that, I mean that for the most part, out-of-staters were entitled to receive no-fault benefits if they were injured in an automobile accident. Not always exactly the same way, but they were entitled to receive them. They were not excluded from them. And that also meant that the rules for liability claims, that is the claim by an injured person against the person who caused the crash, those were generally handled the same way. So if you had the example that you were talking about, where somebody from out of state is visiting and they're involved in a crash with someone from here, under the old rules, that crash would generally be treated the same way as if you had two Michiganders involved in the crash. That, of course, has changed, but those were the general rules from before 2019.
Well, now then, since the changes have come, what are the rules now for out-of-staters in these no-fault benefits?
Great place to start because the no-fault benefit area is the area of the most significant change for out-of-state residents. We now have an exclusion from no-fault benefits that says that those people who are not residents of this state are entirely excluded from no-fault benefits unless they happen to own a vehicle that was registered and insured in Michigan. Of course, that's going to be very few people. So if you're an out-of-state resident who's coming casually to Michigan in your car from another state and you're involved in an automobile accident here, you, the out-of-stater, cannot claim no-fault benefits at all. And the reason that's significant, because as we've talked about so many times, no-fault benefits consist, most importantly, of coverage for medical expenses. And so by taking away no-fault benefits, we have said to out-of-state residents, you're not going to be able to access those benefits to cover your healthcare expenses. And so out-of-state residents then have to turn to some other source of payment for their medical bills if they're injured in a crash.
So how does this affect Michiganders? Obviously, if the car is from here, right, which is, as you mentioned, would be very rare, how would it affect someone in a crash on our side of things?
Great question. Okay, let's suppose that two people are involved in a crash. One's a Michigander and one is from Ohio. Well, that person from Ohio, unless this narrow exception applies, that person from Ohio is not going to be able to get their no-fault benefits covered. They're not going to have their medical expenses covered by no-fault auto insurance. What that means for the person who caused the crash, the Michigander in this case, is that the Michigander is liable to the out-of-state resident for the out-of-state resident's medical expenses. Now, this did not used to be the case. If the out-of-state resident had no-fault coverage, then the out-of-state resident got their medical bills paid through no-fault coverage. Well, now that medical expense liability becomes the responsibility of the person who caused the crash. And in our example here, that's the Michigander. So that's a long-winded way of saying that by changing this area of the law, we really have increased liability for Michiganders. Because now, if a Michigander causes a crash with somebody from out of state, let's use Ohio again, then that Michigander is technically liable for the medical expenses that the out-of-state victim sustained. And so that's the biggest change for Michiganders. And there really isn't anything that the Michigander can do to insulate themselves from that liability, because when you change the law, you've just changed the rules. The most practical thing that people can consider doing, those of us living here, is to increase your liability insurance coverage. Perhaps consider also having an umbrella policy, because now we all have this potential new form of liability in the event we're involved in a car crash with an out-of-stater.
Boy, you just made me think of all the defensive driving classes I took growing up. You want to make sure you are safe on the road, stay out of those accidents. But of course, if it does happen, and if it happens with someone from out of state, it's good to have experts on your side. Tom, where can they reach you?
Well, people can find us online anywhere at www.sinusdramus.com. They can shoot us an email at info@sinusdramus.com, or give us a call, West Michigan, at 616-301-3333.
Perfect. Great info as always. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Todd.
You bet.